Good evening, everybody. My name is Lee Thompson. I'm the Interim Dean of the College of Arts and Sciences, and I am really delighted to welcome you all here. And I'm so glad you could join us for the first event, a lecture by a distinguished scholar in the public humanities at Case Western Reserve University. As many of you know, our university has a long history of sponsoring public programs and community outreach devoted to the humanities. For instance, our Baker Nord Center led the way in creating the Cleveland Humanities Festival, an annual series of lectures and performances, all of them free and open to the public, presented by our region's major educational institutions and art organizations. In addition, members of our Humanities Festival share their scholarship with community residents across Greater Cleveland through the Siegel Lifelong Learning. In recent years, the term public humanities has acquired heightened prominence and significance. In addition to the forms of public-facing work that I just mentioned, scholarship in the public humanities seeks to strengthen civic engagement and advance social justice through collaboration and co-production. This past February, Case Western Reserve reaffirmed its commitment to such efforts by designating 2 faculty members in the College of Arts and Sciences, I'm very, very proud, as distinguished scholars in the public humanities. Erin Benay, Associate Professor in the Department of Art History and Art, and Deepak Sarma, Professor in the Department of Religious Studies, and Deepak joins us today as well. This honor recognizes the vital contributions Erin and Deepak have made through their publicly engaged scholarship and their collaborations with communities and organizations beyond our campus. It also provides them with opportunities to expand their efforts, for example, by delivering an annual lecture. Erin is leading off with today's presentation, and Deepak will be speaking on Wednesday, December 6th, so please mark the event on your calendars as well. It's now my pleasure to say a few words about Erin Benay's extraordinary career. A celebrated scholar of Italian painting and visual culture from the 15th through the 17th centuries, Erin is the author of 3 books. Italy by Way of India, Translating Art and Devotion in the Early Modern World, which was published in 2022. Exporting Caravaggio, The Crucifixion of St. Andrew, published in 2018. And Faith, Gender, and Senses in Italian Renaissance and Baroque Art, a book she co-authored with Lisa Raffanelli, which was published in 2015. Her research has been supported by prestigious grants and fellowships from the National Endowment for the Humanities, the American Institute of Indian Studies, and the Samuel H. Kress Foundation. Erin's studies of early modern art, however, represent only a portion of her scholarly activity. She is the founding member of Engaged Art History, a professional organization dedicated to community-based art history, and a contributor to Humanities for All, the premier open access publication devoted to publicly engaged scholarship. Locally, Erin has collaborated with several nonprofit organizations, including Land Studio and Zygote Press, to develop community-based initiatives involving art making and art history. One of these initiatives, Pressing Matters, will undoubtedly be featured in her lecture today. Pressing Matters is a printmaking and visual literacy workshop for under-resourced teenagers in Cleveland. Erin launched the workshop with seed funding from the Expanding Horizons initiative in the College of Arts and Sciences, and then collaboratively secured a grant from the Ohio Humanities Council to keep it going. Finally, I want to pay tribute to Erin for initiating and overseeing Case Western Reserve's Public Humanities and Civic Engagement Graduate Certificate Program, which is now in its 2nd year. And I have to say, Erin's work with Pressing Matters has a special place in my heart because it reached out to some of the youth from Cleveland and East Cleveland that I work closely with, and I know that it made a strong impression on them. Please join me in welcoming Erin Benay, one of our inaugural distinguished scholars in the public humanities, to the podium for her lecture, from campus to community, taking art and its histories to the streets.
Thank you so much, Dean Thompson, for those really kind introductory remarks. I also would love to thank Provost Ward, who could not be here this evening, for the tremendous honor of being appointed Distinguished Scholar in the Public Humanities. It is a true privilege to present the first of these lectures. In so doing, I hope to call attention to the ways in which CWRU is blazing an important path forward for engaged scholarship across the humanities. In their 2020 special issue, the esteemed journal Art History called for art historians to propose strategies for combating the colonialist, patriarchal, and Eurocentric histories that continue to plague the discipline. The editors wondered how we might eradicate an exclusionary canon of art, expand discourses to include indigenous epistemologies, and of course, recruit more majors at the same time. At stake, the journal seemed to suggest, was the very fate of art history. Indeed, like other humanistic disciplines, art history faces threats of defunding and must answer to the far more existential question of whether the humanities are useful, relevant, or even worthy of pursuit when there are seemingly more pressing crises afoot. Although this is not the place to unpack the function of the contemporary university or of a college education, debate undoubtedly continues to rage around whether the humanities have to be useful, and if so, to whom. For the purposes of my lecture today, I'm particularly interested in thinking about how use or value might be derived from humanistic learning as it is applied in civic life. In order to assess the additive value of art history to a broader community, it is essential to recognize the very failings that are highlighted by queries such as that published in Art History. Decolonizing art history and defending the humanities are, in my estimation, inseparable. Acknowledging the failings of our discipline as one that is tethered to histories of coloniality and dispossession is not new. And yet, the urgency to reform our humanistic discourse remains. Predictably, the unfolding critical reflection on our field has prompted the restructuring of art history survey sequences and the rapid integration of previously neglected artists into curricula, research agendas, and museum exhibitions. These are important steps. But if coloniality is still far from over, as Walter Mignolo has famously argued, what else can art historians do about the trajectory of our discipline? How can we use the topics, methods, and institutions associated? They're just trying to bring in a huge thing of chairs for some reason. Sorry, that's hilarious. That really threw me off there. Associated with it, to strengthen democratic discourse, pursue social and environmental justice, and serve stakeholders outside of academia. Practicing and advocating for a community-engaged, public-facing praxis is one such answer. Critical to my work as an engaged art historian is the belief that producing knowledge and living it are not separable. Interpreting art, writes Harvard professor Doris Sommer, quote, appreciating its power to shape the world can spur and support urgently needed change. This is not a deviation from humanistic attention to the mechanisms of art production and reception. It is a corollary and homecoming to civic education, end quote. As the founders of the Decolonizing Humanities Project at William & Mary University have established, alternative modes of knowledge production, art, culture, and performance are central to exercising systemic racism, sexism, patriarchy, and settler colonialism. In this talk, I map some of the work that I have done at this new methodological frontier and argue for the ways that a more publicly engaged art history can drive social impact. In my work with Land Studio, Zygote Press, and Cleveland Public Library, the history of art was brought urgently to life in our city. In so doing, art historical skills were therefore rendered useful in unexpected ways. Working with a community partner requires a profound adjustment to the parameters of disciplinary content. I'm an early modernist, as you heard from Lee. My research and teaching focuses on 16th and 17th century art and global circulation. Like historians of all types, I'm well practiced in articulating the relevance of historical subjects and convincing students of the resonance of the past in the present day, sometimes their parents too. Nevertheless, mobilizing those histories for the purpose of cultivating real-world change is far less familiar and more challenging to me. For me, partnering with a community organization inherently meant modifying and expanding the definition of my subject area and rethinking my own areas of expertise. I began this process by focusing on a broad topic that I found intellectually appealing, in which I knew had local resonance: paintings on public walls. European and American mural painting belongs to a long and illustrious tradition. From the sumptuous decoration of homes in ancient Pompeii to the Sistine Chapel, walls have been used to teach the uneducated and to inspire devotion. In the United States, muralism began in earnest with Los Tres Grandes, the trifecta of great Mexican muralists Diego Rivera, Jose Clemente Orozco, and David Alfaro Siqueiros, who arrived in the United States in the 1920s and 30s and were commissioned to paint murals that focus on themes of labor, industry, and modernization. Diego Rivera's Detroit industry murals are but one well-known example of how Depression-era wall painting took shape in the Midwest and paved the way for mural painting to become a crucial mode of expression in the civil rights movement. More recently, murals have become integral to the urban process of gentrification in major cities, offering pleasant decorative filler in spaces that were formerly seen as abandoned. In Cleveland and other Rust Belt cities, the hollowed-out cityscape of deindustrialized buildings has offered a particularly conducive canvas for mural painting. Cleveland city planners recognized this potential as early as 1969, when the City Canvases program was created to integrate murals into distressed urban neighborhoods. Funded in part by the National Endowment for the Arts, City Canvases employed Cleveland-based artists to retrofit the sides of buildings and parking garages with vibrant painterly interventions. In 1977, the program was expanded. The Neighborhood Mural Program, sponsored by the Cleveland Area Arts Council, sought to, quote, encourage residents to take a more personal initiative in community affairs and the physical condition of their neighborhoods, end quote. Likely informed by urban theorists like Jane Jacobs, whose seminal work on American cities shaped the trajectory of urban renewal throughout the 60s and 70s, the City Canvases and Neighborhood Mural Program initiated a phase of public art making in Cleveland in which community needs were ostensibly integrated with efforts to revitalize ravaged neighborhoods. As the taste for a Rust Belt chic aesthetic, a pastiche of blown-out architecture, decay, ruins, and reuse has become more pervasive, so too has the addition of numerous murals to the city. Today, these paintings seemingly appear overnight, popping up on the sides of corporate and abandoned buildings alike. Detroit and Pittsburgh celebrate similarly robust mural painting traditions that have recently been the subject of digital humanities projects aimed at documenting and mapping those sites for the purposes of public edification. Although this history of wall painting might fall within my jurisdiction as an art historian, to truly problematize that history with regard to the ongoing urban planning and artistic initiatives in my city lies outside the scope of my scholarly knowledge. rather than attempt to teach a course that might condense 600 years of history into a tidy 15-week arc, I wanted to engage students in a community-driven enterprise that used this art historical foundation as a starting point to venture into Cleveland and to ask questions of the contemporary art around them. I wondered how we might connect the longer history of mural painting with the more recent trajectories of urban development and public art making that regularly appear in Cleveland news. Even more significantly, I was curious to see if it was possible for students of art history to do something with this knowledge, rather than to simply regurgitate it in neatly conceived seminar papers. To do this, I joined with Greg Peckham, director of Cleveland nonprofit Land Studio. A specialist in urban planning and a graduate of CWRU's program in nonprofit management, Greg was especially curious to see how the humanistic background of art history students might enrich land projects. An advocate of public art, Greg was equally motivated to see how the history of mural painting might be applied in the field. As the director of the premier urban planning and public art firm in the city, Peckham is well versed in the theories of urban space, spectacle, and cultural production that would need to inform any such experiment. As a result, it was relatively easy for us to shape a course that integrated these theories with more conventional art historical content. We agreed that the service aspect of the course should address a pre-existing need of his organization. This would ensure that Land and ultimately Cleveland would be the beneficiaries of our work. It was crucial that our collaboration not tax his small nonprofit, but rather that it serve the needs of Land Studio. Greg proposed that students work on a major urban mural project called Interurban, a project which was no longer receiving the attention Peckham felt it deserved. Established in 2016, Interurban pairs artists with recipients of the esteemed Anisfield Wolf Book Award to produce wall paintings that engage issues related to race and social justice. Each mural is inspired by a piece of literature drawn from the Anisfield Wolf canon. The award was created in Cleveland in 1935 by poet and philanthropist Edith Anisfield Wolf in order to recognize books that have helped deepen our understanding of racial prejudice and celebrate human diversity. The mural project began in 2016 with 12 murals situated along the Red Line of Cleveland's RTA train line and has since expanded to include onboard installations and performances. Timed to coincide with the Republican National Convention, which was held in downtown Cleveland that year, these murals adorn bleak, abandoned stretches of a metro line typically frequented by travelers coming and going to Cleveland Hopkins International Airport or commuters on their daily trek. Agitated by voter complacency, Peckham and his colleagues saw Interurban as a call to action, in keeping with the function of much public and social practice art that focuses on collaborative and social praxis over artistic product. In order to keep this mission moving forward, Peckham first charged CWRU students with identifying a new location for a 2020 iteration of Interurban. Previously unfamiliar with the diverse neighborhoods that comprise Cleveland, the students divided into teams and drove the city, many of them leaving the confines of University Circle for the very first time. They studied demographic data, visited community development corporations, and identified community stakeholders. They summarized their findings, compared it with benchmark analysis, and reported back. Extensive class discussions about their experiences, reflective writing assignments, and conversations with Land Studio staff aided the students as they processed the results of this research. Case students observed that there are very few didactic or interpretive materials associated with Interurban. So viewers remain unaware of the connection between the murals and the message of social justice encoded in their production. Rather than offer a series of book jacket paintings that would arguably cheapen the rhetorical content of the Anisfield Wolf literature, Interurban provides a really amazing platform for artists to work through and to interrogate those texts in whatever visual language they see fit. Sometimes this results in the creation of visually satisfying murals that, to the untrained eye, appear as decorative filler, brightening the dull industrial landscape but seemingly offering little opportunity for intellectual engagement. For instance, the Fresno-based Latinx artist Erin de la Cruz revitalized a concrete underpass with a matrix of gray lines over a white ground in this wall painting. Punctuated with larger black abstract forms, his mural takes its inspiration from a poem by Dolores Kendrick, published in her Anisfield Wolf Award-winning The Women of Plums, a collection of poetry written in the voices of enslaved women. In Cruz's selection, Sophie Climbing the Stairs, an enslaved 12-year-old girl learns to read and write, unbeknownst to her white owners. Even at 12, Sophie realizes that literacy is empowerment. On the Interurban website, Cruz explains that this poem resonated with his own struggles to read and write as a child, while his parents spoke Spanish to evade his comprehension. The black shapes of his mural suggest a jumble of deconstructed letters and punctuation on an abstracted gray page of text. But to the passerby, this poignant subplot is lost. As my students rightly observed, such a nuanced reading of the mural is lost to most commuters. After carefully discussing these and other murals in the Interurban cycle, CWRU students proposed that Land Studio revisit how the existing murals were accomplishing the social goals first outlined by the project founders. This should include, they argued, a more robust set of tools to help interested viewers access the Anisfield Wolf literature, obtain information about the artists who painted the murals, and explore the ways that the art and texts worked together to address racism and social justice. Such an approach, the students recognized, would capitalize on their unique skills as humanists and as interpreters of the visual world. As students of art history, the class members acknowledged that the role of the viewer is integral to the function of public art as public culture. In his assessment of the relationship between community and artistic processes in the modern age, Grant Kester suggests that such work initiates a dialogue between the viewer and the object. The viewer becomes an inseparable part of the material element of the work. Painted on walls along major transit corridors in Cleveland, interurban murals are consumed in fleeting circumstances as viewers pass by or stand on train platforms, navigating between one space of the city and another. Movement is integral to their performance as works of art. Their stationary status on concrete surfaces is ironically juxtaposed with the rate of consumption inherent in their viewership. As such, the murals did not function as the call to action the students hoped they would, but the class thought they might have a plan to correct this. Given the green light by Peckham, we worked collaboratively as a class and ultimately decided to write and publish a short book that would lay out an interpretive strategy for Land Studio. As art historians and humanists, the class and I agreed that our humanistic practice of interpretation was central to what we could bring interurban. Providing visual stimulation and beauty to passerby is but one very limited function of public art. Offering greater access to rigorous, interesting, and accessible interpretive materials, quote, coaxes art interpretation out of solitary bounds and enlivens community engagement, end quote. By employing the humanistic modes of interpretation that were already so familiar to them, students in the course wanted to move art history out of solitary bounds and into the realm of civic discourse. We all agreed that one of the most appealing aspects of the interurban murals is how the artists involved have engaged in abstract and conceptual ways with the Anisfield Wolf literature. Indeed, this is also what sets interurban apart from other urban mural projects that do not feature literary texts as their sources of inspiration. Without identifying titles, didactic wall texts, or museum labels, however, few people the students encountered had any idea that the murals they walked, rode, or drove past had anything to do with the award-winning literature that had fueled their creation. Driven by a growing personal attachment to the murals and to a city they previously knew very little about, the students broke into subgroups centered around different aspects of their strategic plan. As they worked, they discussed their strategies with me and with Greg and his team, doing their utmost to tailor and shape their proposals to the feedback they received in real time. First, in order to realize the interdisciplinary and truly revolutionary goals of interurban, the project would need to think more carefully about the spaces in and around the actual murals. Toward that end, students suggested greater collaboration with the RTA in order to produce didactic texts on train platforms and in bus vestibules. Using these spaces for the reproduction of textual quotations from the Anisfield Wolf literature would not only increase visibility for the texts themselves, but would spare the artworks from heavy-handed, aesthetically disruptive text panels. Next, the students suggested the robust use of QR codes on train and bus platforms and at the sites of the murals in order to offer viewers ready access to more information about the art and the literature as well. I should note that in this pre-pandemic moment, QR codes were a novel suggestion and one that the older members of the team, myself included, scoffed at with great dismay. And we could not know, only a few months later, that they would become totally ubiquitous. But this was a very hard sell for me and for some of the members of LAND. And now, of course, that seems absurd. So the students were right. Developing a better mobile app and more sophisticated digital mapping interface for interurban would, students believed, allow this content to be more accessible to the very underrepresented populations that the texts seek to address. Finally, students articulated complex plans for greater community involvement without sacrificing artistic quality. They worked on cohesive proposals for public school involvement and for the distribution of portable objects associated with interurban. Involving public school teachers in competitions for limited edition prints, bookmarks, and other small-scale distributable goods would offer opportunities for diverse Cleveland communities to participate in the culture of their city. These initiatives, students argued, would allow interurban to connect people, literature, and art throughout the spaces of the city, ultimately contributing to the greater humanistic good. In so doing, they hoped, interurban might help to promote a more multidimensional vision of Cleveland, not as a unified, homogeneous city, the land, as it is popularly known, but as a diverse and living space. Land Studio's response was unequivocally positive when they were presented with these plans in an illustrated 72-page book. They folded several aspects of the students' work into grant proposals and began looking forward to next steps. Engaging with university students, Greg Peckham told me, is not part of Land Studio's everyday practice in our work across Cleveland. Working with CWRU students took the interurban project into some uncharted waters. They brought us new ideas to employ technology and to improve the user experience of murals. More importantly, they challenged our team as much as we challenged them. It was not unusual to find ourselves in spirited debates about making the project more accessible, dynamic, and equitable when considering Cleveland's diverse public audiences, end quote. The temporary closure of Cleveland's cultural institutions due to the COVID pandemic also meant that its outdoor spaces and public art was the focus of renewed attention. The CWR students, Greg and I, felt that there was never a more prescient time to focus on the value of public art, open access to knowledge, and the degradation of barriers to both. As a result, CWRU students have been an integral part of Land Studio's Cleveland Walls Mural Festival, and subsequently in the development of the interactive app, The City is Our Museum, which allows Clevelanders and visitors alike to navigate the culturally rich sites in the city through curated public art tours. I resisted putting the QR code on the screen because I was worried everybody would take out their phones right at that moment and it would be very distracting. But Megan Jones, who's the project manager for the City is Our Museum, is here, and I'm sure she would be happy afterward to pull up the QR code so you can all scan and download the app, which is really quite fun and remarkable. Each monument, mural, or architectural stop on the tours feature historically grounded, thoughtfully researched mini-essays that situate the objects within the broader context of Cleveland's urban development and art historical trajectory. A former CWRU art history graduate student explained to the press that her humanities training was invaluable to her work on the app. Quote, "The skills I learned throughout my academic career in art history were essential to this work. Because few public artworks have much written about them, I conducted visual analyses and worked directly with local artists to develop an understanding of the work. I then interpreted artworks in the most accessible way possible, because public art is meant to be for anyone and everyone," end quote. My work with Land Studio proved that students, faculty, and community partner organizations can work together to fruitfully deploy art historical, humanistic strategies outside of the restrictive confines of the ivory tower. Yet to be discovered, however, was if such a model could be repeated with other constituents, and whether such a project could be sustained over a longer duration. In turn, I developed Pressing Matters with a new network of partners. Pressing Matters is a public humanities project that facilitates participatory printmaking, visual literacy, and self-advocacy for a range of participants in Cleveland. Consisting primarily of two components, an art history course here at CWRU and a teen printmaking workshop, first held in the predominantly Latinx Clark Fulton neighborhood on Cleveland's west side, the project continues to be collaboratively run by staff members of Zygote Press, a nonprofit printmaking studio and education facility in Cleveland, merging research, teaching, and service in the process. Inexpensive and easy to disseminate, prints have been made on paper and other materials for over 1,000 years. The invention of the printing press around 1440 arguably marked the start of modern mechanical reproduction and initiated what is often regarded as the printing revolution. Since that time, prints have occupied a crucial place in visual and material culture, serving as entertainment, as propaganda, as provocation, and as inspiration. Printmaking can be a creative mode of political and social expression and has also been instrumental in implicitly and explicitly shaping public discourses around race and identity. With the support of an Expanding Horizon Initiative grant from the Dean's Office, the first part of this project began with a graduate and undergraduate community-engaged course held in the spring of 2021, which explored the history of prints as a medium for the expression of social and political unrest. Rather than confine our work to the classroom, we joined with Jackie Feldman, Executive Director, and Brittany Hudak, Senior Program Manager of Zygote Press, to work on the development of a community-based youth advocacy and printmaking program. Top among our questions was how we might bring the inherently collaborative and implicitly democratizing medium of print to life for teens in Cleveland. Prints bring the creativity, expertise, and labor of multiple individuals together in the making of a single image. During the Renaissance, labor was divided among a number of skilled artists and craftsmen, all of whom contributed their specific expertise, designing, cutting, printing, or publishing, to the creation of the countless prints disseminated following the invention of the press. While some artists in the 19th and 20th centuries experimented with printing their own work, the difficulty of this process, as well as the expense of owning and maintaining printing presses, ensured that printmaking remained a largely collaborative process. The invention of newer methods, such as lithography and screen printing, which require the mastery of complex technical skills, reaffirm the need for collaboration between artists and specially trained printers. The historical division of labor and technical complexity of printing are not the only reasons for collaboration in this medium. Access to printmaking equipment and training has often been limited. Those who could afford their own presses, who had attended art schools or worked in graphic studios were the privileged few who made prints. In the 1930s, graphic workshops and community art centers established under the Federal Art Project of the Works Progress Administration provided artists and community members with unprecedented opportunities to learn printmaking techniques. Workshop presses, the expertise of teaching artists, and commercially trained printers allowed new communities to be exposed to printmaking. Cleveland's print history is intimately intertwined with this type of collaborative print program. It was one of only a handful of cities selected to have its own graphic workshop under the WPA. From its establishment in 1915, Caramoo House was also a crucial incubator for printmakers in Cleveland and helped important African American artists gain access to training and presses for the first time. During the 1960s and 70s, artist collaboratives such as AfriCobra, the Royal Chicano Air Force, and Third World Liberation Front harnessed the power of the printed image for civil rights advocacy. With the help of artists like Elizabeth Catlett, Malachi Montoya, and Esther Hernandez, printmaking in the United States became explicitly tied to social activism. And this was exactly the history we wanted to bring to life for teens. During the CWRU course, we met at Zygote Press for a third of the class meetings. Our goal was to develop a curriculum for teens that would integrate the history of print with art making and visual literacy skills. CWRU students, in turn, developed a cohesive program that would leverage arts and humanities education for the purposes of self-advocacy. CASE students and I coordinated with Zygote Press to ensure that our plans were feasible. Working with Jimmy Juarez and Stephanie Lima Taub at the Community Arts Center, we recruited and enrolled teens for our pilot workshop in summer 2022. An undergrad student in the course, Mimi Thompson, who has since graduated, designed and created all of these beautiful publicity materials for the program. The inaugural workshop was taught by Cuban-American artist Elise Herrera and former MA student and class member Cam McConnell. Together, the two implemented the curriculum designed by the CWRU students. The workshop ran over 7 weeks, convening for 3 hours every Wednesday afternoon. Like the Case Western course, this 7-week workshop combined the history of print in the United States with hands-on printmaking to encourage participants to think about how prints can be used for social change. The teens simultaneously learned how to operate the presses, how to carve and make relief prints, and how art can catalyze progress in their own communities. To further demonstrate to students the relationship between printmaking and social activism, and to root this connection in the contemporary moment, the workshop also included visiting guest artists who spoke about how they use art in their own social practices. One visiting artist, CWRU Law School alum and recent Front International Award winner Amanda King, explained how her work as a photographer, printmaker, and director of the nonprofit Shooting Without Bullets melds her interests in social justice and art. King and graphic artist James Quarles, pictured here, talked with the kids in relatable terms about how their art, personal, and community identities relate to one another. Throughout the workshop, the kids conceived of and created prints about topics of significance to them, including environmental conservation, access to mental health services, equal access to education, and a whole host of other things. As a culmination of the workshop, Zygote hosted a print sale of the posters created by the participants, and the proceeds were donated to different nonprofits of the participants' selection. The teens invited their families and taught them some of the basic skills they had learned over the course of the summer. Pressing Matters continues to thrive. The project was featured in Humanities for All, the premier showcase for publicly engaged humanities published by the National Humanities Alliance, and Jackie Feldman, Brittany Hudak, and I successfully secured major grant funding from the Ohio Humanities Council for the second iteration of Pressing Matters, now underway. Joined by local artists Antoine Washington and Michael Russell, co-founders of the Museum of Contemporary Human Art, Pressing Matters is empowering young people through visual literacy, humanistic education, and art making. Projects like Painting on Walls and Pressing Matters put art historical research to work in ways that are not traditionally associated with academic scholarship. Neither collaboration, for instance, produced a monographic peer-reviewed book, the benchmark of success for most humanities faculty. Instead, these projects prioritize collective knowledge-making and civic action over more conventional forms of scholarly production. Nevertheless, if we are to realize President Kaler's imperative that we engage and strengthen relationships with residents, community partners, local government officials, and civic stakeholders to advance CWRU's vision of community engagement and investment, this is precisely the type of work that faculty and students must take on. Indeed, the ambitious CWRU strategic plan to achieve social impact demands that the university and its mechanisms for supporting research and evaluating its scholars accommodate increasingly reciprocal, collaborative, and action-oriented forms of research and practice. I hope that the final example that I will share this evening will therefore continue building on our institutional capacity for public humanities and engaged art history projects with diverse stakeholders. Initially founded as a settlement house in 1915 by two white sociologists, Russell and Rowena Jelliff, Caramoo House quickly became an important community arts center in Cleveland's Roaring Third. This area, which was bounded between East 55th Street and East 14th on the east and west, and by Carnegie Ave and Woodland Ave on the north and south, was among the most impoverished in Cleveland and housed a largely African-American population. At Caramoo House, the Jelliffs cultivated programs in theater, dance, music, and art, and helped to launch the careers of countless Black artists, including, of course, Langston Hughes. Swahili for gathering place, Caramoo reminds visitors that this is a house grounded in conversation, education, and creative production. In July of 2021, Kelvin Smith Library and CWRU entered a vital new partnership with Caramoo as the theater shifted a large portion of its archive to the care and stewardship of KSL. This public humanities project, Caramoo House in Context, will mine the archive for what it can tell us about Caramoo's history, but more importantly, it will build bridges back to the historic community from which it came in the form of a multi-part, community-based participatory research series at the Langston Hughes branch of Cleveland Public Library and a satellite exhibition at the main branch of CPL downtown. A number of important Black artists of the 1930s and 40s came out of the arts programs fostered by Caramoo House, including Charles Soleil and William E. Smith, Elmer Brown, Huey Lee Smith, and Zell Ingram. These prints and the workings of the Caramoo print shop, market, and gallery offer understudied evidence of what was, by the 1970s, an important destination for Black artists and activists traveling across the United States. The Caramoo House archives quietly telegraph the impact of the graphic arts workshop, where Romero Bearden, Mo Brooker, Jacob Lawrence, Nelson Stevens, Curly Raven Holton, and a whole host of other prominent Black artist printmakers visited, taught, worked, or exhibited. While the Karamu print shop has long since dissolved, this project seeks to animate and enliven the history of Karamu House by integrating its historic past with the present. Timed in anticipation of a major exhibition of Karamu prints to be held at the Cleveland Museum of Art in winter 2025, this community-based research project puts area residents into dialogue with this rich local history through a series of printmaking, oral history, and exhibition workshops. Each component of the project will incorporate CWRU graduate students and students of the Siegel Lifelong Learning Program, and will take place off campus in either the Langston Hughes or Maine CPL branch. The purpose of these interventions is to cultivate an expanded discussion around the significance of Karamu House artists, about the role of printmaking in social practices and civil rights history, and to strengthen community participation with the CMA exhibition. Together, scholars, students, and community members will have the opportunity to share in the collaborative potential of this historic exhibit. The public scholar asks, how can the practices, methods, and conventions of my disciplinary scholarship yield knowledge that contributes to public problem solving and public creation? The projects I have described here seek to answer that question through the use of arts and humanities programming off campus and in the community. The spatial and conceptual boundaries of art history, art, public humanities, and public places are ultimately eroded by doing this type of work. In order to meet with members of Land Studio or Zygote's staff, for example, students needed to physically navigate these varied spaces. Moving across the city arguably brought students further from the institutional sites of cultural containment, the adjacent campuses of CWRU and the Cleveland Museum of Art, for example, and into the spaces where culture is enacted in the daily lives of its residents. This physical transition was mirrored in their intellectual transformations. In their writing about these projects, students explained that it was through their synthesis of historical secondary reading and their participation in a dialogue with partner organizations that they best connected with the city of Cleveland. In studying the history of mural paintings, for instance, students became more committed to the role of public art in the city. What I found most rewarding, wrote one student, was the feeling that my work had the potential to make a real change in the world. After pressing matters, wrote another, I am never going to be able to look at a politically or socially charged work of art without thinking, what is this artwork's call to action? I am struck by my deepened appreciation and understanding of the city of Cleveland. Murals, street art, sculpture, and other art can bring attention to significant issues within a city, wrote another student. While art will not help their problems, it provides a symbol of hope that may inspire change in the Cleveland community. If I had not enrolled in this course, I would never have considered the potential for art to help transform a community for the better. Art may not be a solution to the systemic problems faced by underserved communities. However, it does have the power to highlight these issues and to turn the gears of change. The conclusions students reached at the end of these collaborative projects suggest that it was by lifting both the figurative and literal boundaries between city, classroom, and museum that the most potent lessons about art and society were learned. Projects like Painting on Walls, Pressing Matters, and Karamu House in Context seek to build bridges between the real world and the classroom, the local and the canonical, the university and the town, and the past and the present. These bridges also require institutional infrastructure, which is why in the fall of 2021, several of my colleagues and I founded the new Graduate Certificate in Public Humanities and Civic Engagement, the first credential of its type at CWRU. The certificate is a stackable credential that allows both matriculated students and community members to advance their education by learning the theories and methods of public-facing, community-driven work. The certificate ensures that our humanities students are provided with rigorous intellectual training and the skills to help them amplify diverse community voices, participate in civic life, and expand educational access. And I'm looking at the 3 inaugural students in the certificate right now. As Summer has articulated, the quote, dialogue between scholarship and engagement, thinking and doing, is not a double bind and can instead be a synergistic process, end quote. Practicing a more engaged art history for both faculty and students means acknowledging the implicitly hierarchical relationship between academic knowledge created in universities, libraries, archives, and museums, and the knowledge created in public sites of community service and cultural production. By emphasizing partnerships with a wide variety of organizations and nonprofits, this type of engaged art history seeks to put historically grounded, rigorous research into the service of civic life. Through the adoption of public humanities and community-engaged practices, art history can be used as a tool to bring greater communal access to art, literature, and interpretation. In my view, there's no better proof of the enduring relevance of the humanities. Thank you. So I'm happy to take questions about any part of that, and I think that Jocelyn has a mic for those who are quieter.
I'd like to ask, what do you think about the potential, because like what you're presenting about art as a motivation to change society through inspiring changes, what do you think about the nature of the fact that some of these works were more subtle than others and is easily incorporated into the urban landscape as decoration to promote for the very things that they are against, such as the call for class liberation or call for anti-racist activism is incorporated into the urban landscape of institutions that are very much promoting those things?
That's a great question. What do I think about that? Is that's what how you frame that? It's like, yeah. That's a really hard question. I don't know what I think about that exactly, but I do think that public humanities and this methodological framework, like this strategy for thinking about the meaning and significance of public art, is probably one of the better strategies for approaching the question, because what it would allow you to do is to gather diverse publics together, whether they're the members of the institution in question, the commissioning body that commissions the murals, the artists, right, to have these kinds of discussions and have this kind of debate. But I think this is a real problem that I think you're referring mostly to the Painting on Walls project, the first thing that I presented, and that was a real problem for the students in the class. They were, to be quite frank, they were really troubled in some ways by the way that the murals use these really important bodies of literature for what felt like superficial ends. And that was something that we struggled with. We struggled out loud and in the class about it. And we also struggled with it. I'm looking at Megan Jones, who works for Land Studio. We also struggled about it, over the issue with Land Studio. And I think that was the best we could do, with a really difficult question and a difficult issue. So I don't think your question has a specific answer. At least I don't have a specific answer for it. But those are my thoughts. You asked for my thoughts. Those are them. Or I don't know.
Let's try to do that.
Okay,
So,
yeah.
You made it look so easy. What were the challenges? What were the dark nights of the soul that you encountered in trying to do this? What were the times when the institution failed you instead of supporting you? Speak about that a little bit.
Okay. Maybe my husband would like to answer answer. I think that one of the key challenges for me was figuring out how to navigate my own scholarly expertise and what I feel I know and what I feel I'm good at with the work that I was trying to do, which to me felt very different from anything I had ever engaged with, because as Dean Thompson announced, my books are all, everything is about India and Italy in the 16th century, and so I think navigating my anxiety about whether or not I was doing it right, or if I was engaging in the correct way, if I was employing best practices, that was an ongoing and is an ongoing challenge, something that I think about all the time. I think that the other key challenge is that this kind of work cannot rely on a fixed syllabus with assignments that are put in stone. And even if you're not working with students, even if you're working with a community partner on your own, everything is constantly in flux. Everything is constantly moving. There are constantly moving parts. And it's hard to make that okay for oneself, let alone make it okay for the students. So I think that was another really key challenge, was learning, and has been learning, how to articulate for students why it's okay to not have a final assignment written into the syllabus yet, and how we're going to work on that together and sort of think through those things together. I have to say that Case Western has been institutionally very supportive. And so, ours is a university that is quite wealthy, and we have a lot of financial resources, and they're accessible, and you can apply for and get them. And if you want to involve students, then they really have more resources for you. So I feel like this has been a really exciting way to put our university's resources to work. Dan Malthrope.
Hi. How are you? I'll take the mic.
CEO
Thanks.
of City Club.
Hi, Doc. Thanks so much. Congratulations on your great work. I'm curious. You told a little bit of a story about working with Land Studio and the push and the pull there with students, and I wonder how good our community is at welcoming students into civic life and into civic work.
That's a good question. I kept looking to see if Greg had come in, but he's not here, right, Megan? No. He'll get the report from you. I don't know that I can speak to the city as a whole. I'm not willing to do that. But I will say that Greg was extremely welcoming, and did a phenomenal job of being open-minded about what these 12 art history students could have anything to do with him. I mean, he was really willing to play along and see how that was going to play out. You have been very willing and open to play along. You've come to my classes on multiple occasions. So I think if your and Zygote Press has been extraordinarily welcoming, and Cleveland Public Library and the Sculpture Center, I'm trying to think of it. So that's a lot of institutions. I mean, it's not a lot, but it's some nonprofits in Cleveland, and no one has been closed-minded. No one has said no. I think they're very happy and willing. I think it's actually that Case Western students very rarely leave University Circle. And so, it's my hope to encourage them to get on the RTA.
Thank you so much. This is really exciting to see the culmination of the last few years of your work. Going forward, or maybe reflecting on these projects, where do you see digital art history and digital humanities playing a role in your work?
I'm laughing because there are a bunch of students from my public humanities class in the room right now, and that's the week we're in right now in the syllabus, is doing digital humanities and the interface of digital and public humanities. And so I think there's, for those of you who don't know about this change in nomenclature, digital humanities as opposed to public humanities used to be computational, computing humanities or something, right? And is basically the wedding of computer science with humanities. And so digital humanities, I think, has in some ways been foundational for public humanities because the people who were practicing digital humanities and making, let's say, archives public and open access were some of the first people to actually like use the internet as like a viable space for production. So I think there are a lot of lessons that we can learn from digital humanities. There is now this newish move toward digital public humanities, which is how can we involve communities and publics in the creation of digital humanities projects? Because actually digital humanities projects, despite sounding very open accessy and democratizing and so on, aren't really, they're really meant for scholars. They're just tools to make it easier for scholars to do their scholarly work. So it's all very insular and academic and ivory tower-ish. But digital public humanities tries to turn that process outward and open. So for instance, if you were gathering oral histories from community partners or working with community members to gather oral histories, that repository would be kept in a public space that was open access, where the very community members who were contributing their oral histories would then be able to access them, share them with family, and so on. I've really gone on a tangent. Where do I see the future of that? I have no idea. I think it's probably only going to become more and more publicly facing, open access. I just was listening to Shelley Lowe talk, who's the head of the NEH at a conference 2 weeks ago, and everything is public and engaged humanities across the board. So I would think that would continue in that trajectory.
So I just want to say first how impressed I am by all of this and how moved. And it's really amazing, and it's such a great model for the rest of us to be thinking about. And I have a comment about sort of learning things backwards, like backing into things. So in a sense, you kind of backed into this world. And I think that that takes a lot of courage. And the fact that you're at the same time really trying to learn about it and learn about best practices, I think makes it all perfect, because there is no school that teaches you how to do this kind of thing. So in a sense, you have to create it. And that's a massive intellectual project, as well as being just a very, very, very time-consuming project. So what I'm leading to, in addition to expressing my profound admiration, is how do you see this being incorporated into tenure and promotion guidelines? You can see I'm a department chair.
You haven't put me on the spot or anything with that. Well, luckily, some of that work has been done by the Modern Language Association. I think that the College Art Association, which is the professional association of art historians, lags conservatively behind many of the other humanistic fields, quite frankly. So in the MLA, when you look at the MLA website, there are guidelines for evaluating and assessing public humanities scholarship that I think are, very widely accessible and help scholars to understand, other scholars to understand how to assess this kind of work. Engaged Art History, the organization that I created, also gathers together and posts any rubrics or professional guidelines that have been already created by universities across the world, so that scholars can look to those, share them with their departments, share them with their chairs, and help to kind of create that path forward for, how do you look at this kind of work? How do you evaluate something that takes 5 years but doesn't have a thing to show for it at the end? So, I think that drawing from that is really important. Obviously, I made a very strong plug for, the attention of our university to this kind of work as being a very viable and important aspect of scholarship. And, I have other colleagues out there who are also doing this work, who I think are going to help kind of create that precedent and show us how it's done. I mean, luckily, public history, for instance, is a field that has existed since the 80s, and they've really laid the groundwork for how we look at this kind of scholarship. So,
Fantastic.
I'll give you materials to look at when I go up for a full, don't worry.
Revision of our department.
Yes. I put some stuff in the drive folder about it.
I want to echo Betsy's comments in that this is such impressive work, And I know how much energy and thought and passion this all took to get it to the point that you have shared with us. I also know that there are other faculty in the college, Faye is a great example, who are really working hard at really doing this amazing integration of teaching, scholarship, community outreach. I mean, you're doing it all together, wrapped together. And also, because I have the vantage point of being dean and seeing across all the different departments, I see this amazing effort of true integration among other faculty's work. And it tends to be among our younger faculty. And I wonder if there's a way that we can pull you and Faye and others in the college to teach the rest of us how to do this so well. Because isn't that the ideal? Is to kind of seamlessly wrap together the three pillars of what academics are supposed to be doing. And so just wanted to throw that out there and just welcome ideas.
Oh, yes, I have a whole set of ideas we could talk about. So I will say that we did a little bit of this when we first created the certificate program. And my colleague, Andrea Rager, who is in the back waving, she did a one-day workshop that was a very tiny version of a much longer workshop that I had done several years ago. We hired the same person, brought him to Case Western, and maybe partially as a result, she was able to teach an incredible course with Spaces Gallery in Cleveland that resulted in students being able to work on and then go to Venice for the Architectural Biennale and host a whole other series of programs on the theme of everlasting plastics and environmental justice. So I think we have the tremendous resources at this university to provide faculty with that kind of instruction. Julian Rogers and I are working on a co-authored proposal for the Baker Nord Center. I see Michelle in the back, that would request funding for this exact type of workshop. Julian runs the local governance, Office of Local Government and Community.
Community relations.
Yeah.
Government and community relations.
Yeah. So I think we have plans afoot, hopefully, to do that, just that. So thank all of you very much for coming. I know that there's a reception, so